Hello and welcome to another episode of Agency Leadership Live. I'm your host, Chip Griffin, and we're going to do something a little bit different today. I had a nice show all prepared and chucked the notes off to the side and said, you know what? We're going to talk about something different. And the reason why we're going to talk about something different is because I caught a good chunk of a live show earlier today. Chris Brogan, every day at 10 o'clock Eastern Time, 10 a.m., does a live stream. And today he had on a few different people. He had on, whoops, let's see, I jumped a little bit too far there. Let's see if we can bring up the slide. There we go. So he's got Carrie O'Shea Gorgone from Marketing Profs, who is helping to co-host the show. And guests today were Katie Robert of Trust Insights and John Jantsch of Duct Tape Marketing. And something that John said really struck a chord with me. And so I thought it would make a good topic for today's show. And before we do that, I would like to give props to John because he is a prolific author. His most recent book is The Self-Reliant Entrepreneur, which is basically he's got 365, or actually I guess it says 366 daily meditations. They're basically quotes from various works that he's pulled out, and they're helpful to entrepreneurs as they're looking at their journey and thinking about what's ahead. He's perhaps best known, though, for this book that he wrote, I think it was probably about 15 years ago or so, Duct Tape Marketing. And that's where you can find John online at ducttapemarketing.com. Really great stuff in here. You can see that my copy of the book is yellowed because it is so old. It's a book that there's a lot of great insights. And I think the reason why all of this sort of struck me today was because John is all about entrepreneurship, and entrepreneurship is at the core of being an agency leader. We may not have set out to be entrepreneurs, but that is what you become as soon as you own a business, as soon as you own an agency, and you're figuring out how to grow it. But something John said in particular resonated with me, and I think it will with you too. And so let's go ahead and bring that up on the screen. Entrepreneurship is the greatest self-development program ever invented. And I don't know if this is something that he has said before or if this is something that he came up with on the fly on Chris's show. But either way, it's something that just really resonated. And it reminded me of something that I said to a friend of mine many years ago, who at the time we were sitting in the cafeteria at the Harvard Business School in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and he was in the MBA program there. And I happened to say that, I felt like I was getting an MBA by running my own businesses. And the concept is the same. You learn so much about yourself, about business, about life from entrepreneurship. And I think that's something that is worthwhile for us all to be thinking about now. So what I wanted to do was to start by talking a little bit about my own journey into running an agency and how I got involved in entrepreneurship from the beginning, and some of the lessons that I've learned along the way. And as I do this, I'd love it if you're listening in. Feel free to share some of the lessons that you've learned, some of the ups and downs of being an entrepreneur, when you realized perhaps that you were an entrepreneur, because frankly, many times we're accidental agency owners and we didn't set out to do it, so we may not even imagine ourselves as entrepreneurs until somewhere later on down the line. So if you've got those thoughts, share them in the comments. If you have questions, feel free to ask them along the way. If you're watching this on replay, certainly share your comments there as well. So let's get started by talking about how I got into entrepreneurship and into agency ownership. And it's really, when I was a kid, I relished the idea of being an entrepreneur. It will shock probably none of you to know that as a kid in the 1980s, I loved watching Family Ties and seeing Michael J. Fox walk around in a suit and tie with his briefcase and all that. And so to me, as a kid, I wanted to be a businessman, an entrepreneur, or something like that. And I wasn't really sure what to make of it. And then I started thinking about politics and as a kid, I wrote computer programs. I even had created a company, although I didn't realize at the time that you actually had to incorporate a company properly. I simply called myself, I think it was G-Tech International or something like that. It turns out there is actually a company named G-Tech. G-Tech had nothing to do with the computer programs that I wrote in high school. But in any event, I learned along the way. and spent some time in politics, worked in Washington, D.C., and was away from entrepreneurship to one degree or another for the first several years of my career. And then I was fortunate enough to have lunch with an old friend who was not so old at the time, but he was working as the chairman of the board for an internet startup called townhall.com. And so this was back in the mid 1990s. And he asked me if I had some suggestions of who might be the next CEO of that company. And I said, well, here's a couple of names that I can think of. And he said, well, actually, we were thinking about you. And I said, well, now that's kind of ridiculous. I kind of laughed it off and said, that's, you can't be serious. I'm 23, next, that was a good joke. Thank you for the pizza. And he said, no, I'm serious. We'd like you to do that. So I did that for a couple of years and really enjoyed it. And, getting to run what was effectively an internet startup in the age of Netscape was incredibly exhilarating. I was able to experiment with a lot of different ideas, and we had some great growth. And some of the things that I did with Town Hall live on even to this day, even though I've been gone from the company now for, 23 years, I guess? God, I'm dating myself now. In any case, when I was done working at Town Hall, I started out and did some consulting on the political side of things because I was thinking about making a transition back to New England, where I was from, getting out of Washington, D.C. And as part of that process, I realized that I was going to have to get a job in New Hampshire if I wanted to do that. And so, like all good folks who are unemployed, because after the 1998 election cycle, I no longer had a job. My consulting had been tied to that. And I said, well, geez, what do I do now? And nobody in the political world calls themselves unemployed. They call themselves consultants. So that's what I did. And so starting in November of 1998, after Election Day, I called myself a consultant and essentially hung out a shingle. But the truth is, I was hedging my bets. At the time, I was still looking for a job of some sort in New Hampshire and not thinking that this was the moment at which I was going to start a business. I still had in the back of my mind that I might like to start a company somewhere down the road, but I wasn't really thinking of that as the moment. I had just gotten married, and stability was probably something I was more focused on then than I had been earlier when I was single and all that. And so I was really torn, and so I called myself a consultant, and all of a sudden, before I'd even moved back to New Hampshire, I picked up my first contract, and then picked up another one shortly after I returned to New Hampshire. And so I started to generate some revenue, and I said, well, maybe now is the time to move forward with this, and maybe now is the time to embrace entrepreneurship and to figure out how I can actually start a business now instead of later. And there was never that single aha moment. It was all gradual. It was just get some business, do some work, get paid, keep doing it, one foot in front of the other. And soon enough, I got to a point where I had more work than I could handle. And so I started taking the business that I had gotten and started farming it out to contractors. And so I had teams of folks that I used, some for research, some for web development, some for graphic design, because at the time my business was sort of a public affairs digital marketing type agency. We're looking at the end of the 1990s, moving into the first part of the new millennium. And it was, I had the technology background from my experience as a kid fooling around with computers and from having run an internet startup. But now it was that time where I had to figure out how to turn this into a real business. And so I learned a lot. I learned things like you have to actually incorporate a business. I learned about all of the different taxes that you have to manage as a business as opposed to an individual, and all of the ins and outs of those kinds of things. And so my own personal self-development program, going back to what John talked about, it was starting to move forward. I was starting to learn and figure things out. And so as I did that, I started to think about, okay, where do I want to go from here? And so within a couple of years of having run my own agency with largely contractors, I didn't have any W-2 employees. And so I said, well, one of the things I'd like to do is to figure out how to make money while I sleep. And so I started talking with another consultant, and we came up with a couple of different ideas of some businesses that we could do together. And we were getting nudged along by some of our friends to come up with something. And so eventually we created an online media monitoring service called Custom Scoop. And initially, it was really a response to the needs of our own agency's clients. He was also doing public affairs consulting. We had clients who were using traditional paper news clipping services, where you had the folks who were sitting there with the X-Acto knives, cutting out the newspaper articles, stuffing them in an envelope, mailing them to you every couple of weeks. Those of you who are old enough will remember this when you were in a PR or marketing agency back in the day. This is how you got your news clips. And we said there has to be a better way. You want to get a fixed budget. You want to have more timely reporting, particularly for those of us who are in the public affairs space, where if you get a clip 2 or 3 weeks after the fact, it wasn't useful. So we were able to take our core agency business and grow it out by working together on a productized solution, a software as a service, as it has come to be known, although I don't think that term was much in use back in 2000 when we first got started. And so we started to do this. And so I'm running an agency and I've got this software business. And so I'm starting to learn new things because we started to have employees. And so then you start to learn about managing employees when you're the owner. I knew about managing employees when I was running someone else's company, but it's very different because the psychology changes. It becomes much more you're much more deeply tied to your employees when you are the owner. And so that's something that you learn along the way. And I realized that I needed to get as much perspective as I could. And so I was fortunate because I was in the joint business that we had, Custom Scoop. I had business partners. And so we were able to feed off of each other and to offer each other advice and to learn from each other. And I was fortunate because I was able to leverage a lot of that knowledge to help me run my own agency better. And so as time went on, as the years went on, I began starting other businesses and other agencies. And so over the course of the last 20 some years, I've had a variety of different agencies, all at the intersection of technology, communications, public affairs, those kinds of things. But it's been a constant learning process because there have been ups and downs. And one of the things that I think a lot of folks don't realize, and certainly I know that it's not something that most people advertise, there are the downs, right? There are tough times as entrepreneurs, and that's where we learn a lot. When you have a client that's, that represents 30, 40, 50% of your business and they go away, that's a huge learning experience. When you have one of the lessons that I learned when I was running town hall was when we had a server crash and it lost a lot of data, and I had to work with some outside organizations to help them recover their data. And it turned out we couldn't recover some of it. That's a painful lesson to learn, but it's something that I've been able to take and apply over the course of the next 20 some years as I've been building my own businesses and thinking about how do you have proper redundancy and backups and those kinds of things. Made mistakes for clients along the way. I've given bad advice. I know, shocking. You can't believe it that I would ever give bad advice, but occasionally I have given bad advice. I've taken bad advice too. I've followed someone else's advice when I had that, niggling thought in the back of my head that said, maybe I shouldn't do that. And so that's part of the development process of being an entrepreneur. And you take lessons away from all of these successes and failures. And I think that right now, a lot of you are experiencing challenges. Candidly, I'm experiencing challenges. My business took a huge hit with everything that happened back in March because my business was focused on in-person, big strategic consulting projects. Those aren't as much in demand by agencies right now. Certainly the in-person piece isn't, and strategic is much more narrowly focused and not long-term horizon type things. And I get that. It's part of the learning process. And so, like many of you, I've had to think over the last few months, how do I reinvent things? How do I reposition the services that I'm offering? How do I take the expertise that I have and package it up in a way that is more suited to the current environment and the needs of the agencies that I work with? And that's something that a lot of you are doing as well. I know I'm talking to a lot of you as agency leaders who are trying to figure out how do you make those adaptations in your own business? How do you make the adaptations to your cost structure to be better positioned going forward? This is all part of that development process that John was talking about on Chris Brogan's show today. And so you're able to take these lessons and not just apply them to your own business, not just decide how you're going to use them to grow your business ahead. You're also able to use them to figure out, what does it mean for the rest of the things that you do? And one of the really great things that I've found over the years is how I've been able to integrate some of my hobbies and outside interests with my business. So, for example, one of the things that I've done for almost 10 years now is officiate youth sports. I started with baseball and moved on to basketball. You learn a lot from officiating sports and things, what we call as trainers in officiating, game management. How do you work with coaches and players and other participants in order to have a smooth outcome? You're able to take those lessons and apply them to business. At the same time, I'm able to take some of the lessons that I've learned as an agency owner and apply them to my officiating. Because one of the things that you learn when you're in business, when you are an entrepreneur, when you're running an agency, is working with clients who may be challenging. Dealing with challenging clients is very similar to dealing with challenging coaches if you're an official. And so a lot of the same tactics and techniques that you have in order to communicate effectively, in order to de-escalate, in order to find an outcome that works, they apply both ways. One of my other hobbies is woodworking, and I've been able to apply that for some of the work that I do as an agency owner, believe it or not, or as an entrepreneur. And actually, you're looking at some of it here in the background. I've built a lot of the furniture on this set or in my office, depending on how you want to perceive it. And if you looked outside of the rectangular frame here, you would see that this really is, even though it's in my home office, it really is sort of like a set. A dirty little secret, those bricks are not real. I didn't pull out mortar. It's actually just a backdrop that's been integrated in order to make it look good, because the wall itself looks pretty bad. So there's a lot of these things that we as entrepreneurs, as agency owners, are able to move back and forth with the rest of our lives, and it really is a development process that you can take advantage of. And so I think that's really why what John said today struck that chord, because it is a constant learning process. It is a constant self-development process. And the more that we're able to take advantage of those learnings and be open to them, right? I mean, part of the challenge here is to be receptive to the lessons and to sit there and look at the failures as challenges and things to learn from, as opposed to true obstacles that are preventing us from achieving the success we want. And particularly in a challenging environment like we have now, like we had when I was running a business in 2008 and 2001, it's a time to reflect, and it's a time to find those opportunities. Because if you're really developing yourself, you can figure out what are the ideas and the paths forward that will help your business grow. You can also figure out what it is that you want yourself. And this is something that I work with agency owners on a lot. Because if you're going to take all of the risk and all of the stress that comes with being an entrepreneur, you need to think about what you want to get out of it. And so if you think about those, and if you focus on the opportunities that are out there for you, it's a good time to reflect and figure out, are you on the path that you want to be on? So set the business aside for a moment. What have you learned from being an agency owner and entrepreneur that you now want to apply to your own life? Are you more focused on the number of hours you work, the kind of work that you do, the amount of money that you make, the amount of stress that you have? Do you have time horizons for certain goals outside of the business? Once you figure those out, then you can pull them in and apply them to the business and make sure that the business is driving towards your personal goals as an owner. And you want to have that synergy between the two. And that's part of that self-development process that you undergo as an entrepreneur, particularly if you're an accidental entrepreneur. If you were someone who started out as a freelancer, maybe like me, you were unemployed and it felt better to call yourself a consultant, and then all of a sudden you had more work than you could handle, it kind of mushroomed from there. You didn't set out necessarily to be an entrepreneur. And so you didn't necessarily structure your business that way. So the self-development that you've gone through needs to inform the adjustments that you make. And now is a great time to step back and say, I'm not going to allow inertia to take me forward. Inertia is not the way to run a business. It's not the way to run your life. You want to make some deliberate, conscious decisions about the way that you want to move forward. I call it building an intentional agency, right? You can be an accidental owner, but you need to build an intentional agency. And all of the lessons that you've learned, whether you've been running the business for 6 weeks, 6 months, 6 years, or decades, are things that you can apply as you plot your own path forward. So we're all in that stage, whether we've got a booming agency that's helping with digital transformations or crisis communications, or we've suffered some setbacks. Now is the time to take a look and figure out what are those paths forward and how can we apply all of those lessons to it. So hopefully this has inspired you to take a fresh look at your own business, to examine your journey as an entrepreneur, where it's been, where it's going. And if you have any questions, I'd love to answer them. Feel free to leave them in the comments or shoot me an email at chip@agencyleadership.com. As always, you can see all of the live streams that we've done, as well as additional videos that I've created at agencyleadership.tv. And if you are looking for additional resources, you can join the free Agency Leadership Council on the website at agencyleadership.com/join. So thank you again, everybody, for joining me today. I really appreciate everything that you do to support this show, and I look forward to being back with you on Wednesday at noon Eastern Time with another timely topic.